The high street is dying. Shops that once sold music, films, books, and games are boarded up or turned into vape shops and charity outlets, or even something like a kebab shop. At the same time, companies like Sony are quietly moving away from physical copies of games. You no longer earn the product in the same way. You license it, they can alter it, remove it, or change the rules after you've paid. Behind the convenience of digital download sits a bigger shift. Corporate incentives, ESG scoring, and a cultural push that has replaced many beloved franchises with products that feel designed to lecture rather than entertain. This is not nostalgia, it's about control, ownership, and what happens when institutions decide the public no longer needs a physical stake in its own culture. Walk through most British town centres and the same pattern is there. Empty units, declining football, and a sense that the places where people once gathered to buy, browse and talk are being hollowed out. Online retail is obviously the driver, but it's not the only one. Business rates, staffing costs, parking and changing habits all play a part. Parallel to this is a quiet change in entertainment, the steady removal of physical media. Sony, Microsoft, and others have made it clear that the future they want is a digital first or digital only. Physical discs and cartridges are treated as an inconvenience. At the same time, larger parts of game industry have shifted turn and content under pressure from investors, rating systems, and internet culture. The result is fewer physical products on shelves, less genuine ownership for the customer, and a growing number of titles that prioritize messaging over the qualities that once made the medium popular. These trends are connected by incentives, not by a single secret meeting. And this is where it comes down to the death of the high street. The decline of the British high street has been visible for more than a decade and accelerated after 2020. Department stores, specialist music shops, game retailers, and independent bookshop have closed in larger numbers. Online platforms offer lower prices, greater choice, and home delivery. Fixed costs on the high street, business rate, rents, energy, and wages remain high. Many councils and landlords have been slow to adapt units for new release or new uses. The result is a feedback loop. Fewer shops mean fewer reasons to visit, which means even fewer shops survive. This is not about convenience. Physical shops are places of discovery, conversation, and local employment. When they disappear, towns lose more than retail space. They lose shared public life. Some of the replacement businesses, mobile phone repairs, vape shop, kebab shop, betting shop, charity stores, do not generate the same football or community function. The high street that once reflects a town's character is increasingly reduced to a corridor of transient or low-value uses. Policy has contributed. Planning rules, taxation, and the failure to reform business rates have made it harder for traditional retail to compete with pure online models. Sony and other major publishers have been reducing their commitment to physical copies of games. Digital distribution is cheaper, there is no manufacturing, no shipping, no returns, and no second-hand market that cuts into new sales. Margins are higher, and updates and patches can be forced. Licenses can be altered or revoked, and even something like with some DRM, even forced on media and enabled in browsers, can even stop you from actually earning these 100%. The customer no longer wants a permanent object. They hold a license that exists at the company's discretion. This shift has practical consequences. Physical discs and cartridges could not be kept, lent, sold, or passed on. They did not require a permanent internet connection that is connected to servers, or a corporate account or forced email sign-up that could be banned. Digital stores can remove titles, change terms, or shut down the servers. The convenience of downloading is real, but so is the loss of genuine ownership. When companies push digital only or digital primary releases, they are not simply following consumer demand. They are reconstructing the relationship so that the customer has less power and the platform has more power, including whether that's Microsoft or Sony with PlayStation and Xbox. The same logic is visible in films and music. Physical media is treated as legacy, while streaming and downloads became the default. And this is where we come down into the ESG ratings and what they actually are. ESG ratings are produced by firms such as MSCI and others. Large asset managers have used these scores and related engagement policies when allocating capital and voting proxies. The scores focus on financially material risks under 3 pillars: environmental, social, and governance. The criteria that have mattered most for gaming and media companies sit mainly in the social and governance pillars. Board and workforce diversity metrics have been among the most concrete and enforced. Raters and major investors track the percentage of women and, in some cases, underrepresented groups on boards and in senior management. For several years, the largest asset managers stated expectations, including targets such as boards with at least 30% women, and voted against directors at companies that made insufficient progress. By 2020 and 2025, those explicit numerical requirements have been scaled back or removed amid political and legal pressure. But the earlier multi-year push has already shaped corporate behaviour and internal targets. Human capital and inclusion policies are also scored. Companies are rewarded for formal diversity programs, demographic disclosures, training and internal structures. This creates measurable pressure to demonstrate progress. In practice, large publishers created dedicated roles, published workforce breakdowns, and adopted internal processes around content and representation. Consultancies specialising in inclusive narrative design were brought onto high-profile projects. The pathway is indirect but real. Change the composition of decision-makers and the internal risk calculus, and creative decisions begin to shift towards what is perceived as safer or high scoring on social metrics. Direct scoring of specific game narratives is limited. Controversies, however, can feed into broader reputational assessments that investors notice. Risk-averse publishers become more cautious about content that could generate negative coverage. The result in some cases has been safer, more committee-driven creative choices. Several expensive titles that leaned heavily into contemporary messaging have underdeveloped commercially relative to expectations. Some studios have since stated publicly that they will prioritise player enjoyment and commercial success over ideological elements. Digital distribution aligns primarily with higher margins and greater post-sale control. ESG enforces broad institutional preferences for efficiency, measurability, and sustainable corporate behaviour. But it's not the sole driver of the move away from physical media. The combination of economic incentives and scoring pressure produces a clear outcome. Fewer physical products, less genuine ownership for the consumer, and cultural offer that increasingly feels managed from above rather than made for the audience that built the industry. None of this requires a single coordinated conspiracy. It requires aligned incentives. Digital is more profitable and more controllable to these companies. ESG scoring rewards certain corporate behaviours on diversity, disclosure, and risk. Creative industries have absorbed a particular set of values. The outcome is fewer physical shops, fewer physical products, and a growing distance between the games and films that once feel like shared cultural property and the ones released today. Ownership actually does matter. A disc on a shelf is different from a license in an account. A high street with real shops is different from a row of empty units and delivery vans. Culture that has passed institutional tests is different from culture that is simply has to be good. The trends are visible. The question is whether enough people will notice and whether they are prepared to act on what they see. By supporting physical media where it remains, by choosing products that respect the audience, and refusing to pretend the loss of ownership and the narrowing culture are progress. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed this video about me talking about the loss of physical media and also to do with the high street shops being closed down, whether that's different branches around up and down the country. And obviously, as I've talked about this in some of my work videos where I've talked about different aspects of wokeism, when you look at different types of games where they're being forced into the ESG, where there is a scoring system and they have to meet a requirement in order to turn a profit. And some of these companies, maybe something like with indie games, where they basically would have a lot more freedom creatively, more independents are even being invaded with these cheap knockoff Chinese and Indian or even Russian games that have been basically made so that the player is more having to have workism injected into their games. And you start to notice this in the gaming industry, especially because nowadays games are a lot more expensive. They're even charging for the new Grand Theft Auto 6, I think what was it, $200, so less than, so that would be £180, £190 if I can remember the transaction or the rates. And because of this, it makes it harder for you to actually earn media. And because of this, like physical, even with discs that I've got, the reason why physical discs, even if they have DRM on them, is you actually earn them. You have a copy of that game and you can play it any time. However, with digital records, if you look at some older games, like with to do with, I think what was it, one of the games, Army of Two, they actually switched the servers off so you can't actually play the game. And because of this, it makes it a lot more difficult for you to actually play the games. If it's a really, really, really old game, you'll have a lot more difficulty trying to play it. So that's why having physical media, going down to the shop, paying for the media, and actually being able to earn it would be a lot better than digital. And this also takes me back to when I would also earn like an Xbox and see people or even my friends have hacked Xboxes where they can pretty much play any game they will ever wanted or ever wanted to play. And obviously a lot of that media is going to eventually fade away. So because of the cost and the cultural erosion from gaming, including people also blaming women for gaming, which again, a lot of people nowadays are classed as gamers. Anyone can be a gamer, you know, from the very simple things from playing Super Mario Kart to now something with other games like Call of Duty, which even back then was competitive, to now where you can play it as an esports. And when it comes down to gaming culture, especially where you play one of your favourite games, and it can be a very broader one, you see women getting into this industry. And in fact, I remember when Elon Musk fired 90% of the workforce, and the majority of them was women, in fact, even in their roles, but basically completely useless. And the majority of the people that Musk has kept are actually the ones that actually run Twitter. And it's more based to have men work in this industry because, again, a lot of wokeness is even interjected something like with comics. For example, when it came down to that woman that wrote the new Red Hood series that wanted to make Red Hood more sexier, in quote, turns out to be a troll, but also to do with the fact that they tried to turn Red Hood into this weird romance love story. And eventually what happened was that writer was fired over comments of a Charlie Kirk. So you can see when this media is even ruined to do with when women are writing them. And obviously, yeah, there are some bad writers, but when it comes down to a lot of women nowadays, they're very woke. And because of this, when they write media, it will always be interjected with a lecture rather than actually being fun. You sort of see this with modern game mechanics, for example, like with Minecraft, where it's kind of annoying to play as a casual player. Because I remember this mod that was developed by this Minecraft YouTuber, and obviously this is like an aspect where you basically want to play a game, but it's not too casual where you have to make a mob farm. And it's really annoying with modern gaming where you can't just play the game, you have to basically create a farm in order to get OP stuff. And because of these modern requirements in games, it makes it very difficult for you to actually enjoy them casually. So there are a lot of modern issues, both actually earning the games, in even seeing the high street shops being shut down, and also costing jobs, but also to do the replacement with our media, and eventually everything will just be crap and work. And the only thing that will survive will probably be physical media, unless we actually get mods to get rid of all the crap out of the games, as I said in previous videos, like to do with American Krogan, with his Commonwealth mod that removes all the workism from Fallout 4. And as well, if you want to go in the link in the description below, with links to my other social medias and Discord as well.